21. Ace didn't know what the time was. She'd been wearing a wristwatch when she was brought into the big cell, a circle of armed guards standing just inside the cell door, then retreating quickly as she was shoved inside. The door had chunked shut behind her on a remote control lock, and then the other prisoners had begun to move forward, a slow tide. The watch had been torn off her during the first fight. It didn't matter. Ace didn't need it. She could estimate the passage of time with a fair degree of accuracy. She guessed she'd been in the cell for about 2.5 hours. She'd had to fight 3 men and 2 women. The women had been the worst. Then some fresh prisoners had arrived, 2 teenage boys. And because of them, and because she'd won the fights, Ace had been left alone. Now she squatted in a corner of the cell, balanced so that the ball of each foot was on the concrete floor while she sat back on her heels. It was comfortable when you got the knack, although you had to rise up every so often, like doing deep knee bends if you didn't want your muscles to lock. There was a bench running the full length of one wall of the cell, but it was fully occupied and ruthlessly defended. You didn't necessarily have to fight to get a place, but the other things you had to do were worse. After the teenagers arrived, Ace had a chance to sit back and look and listen, learning everything she could about this new environment. But then she'd heard the man talking about how his first month in the cell had been the worst, and someone else agreeing and saying it hardly ever took more than a year before you got your first court hearing. And then she'd seen the woman nursing a newborn child in one corner, a pale, quiet baby. And that was when Ace stopped looking and listening. As she rocked back and forth on her heels, Ace kept her arms hugged tight around herself, her bruised shoulder aching savagely now. "You're the one, right?" Ace looked up. She recognized the man from the crowds that had gathered during the fights. He had watched with interest and kept a safe distance. He was better dressed than the other prisoners and seemed to be able to move through any part of the cell with impunity. "I'm from the committee," said the man. "Actually, to tell you the truth, I am the committee." He smiled at Ace. "You're a good fighter. I'm sorry to lose you." He signalled, and 2 big men moved in quickly and dragged Ace to her feet. She pulled free, but the men had already released her and moved back. "I was going to give you a week, and then, if you held out, I was going to nominate you for the committee," said the well-dressed man. "But that's the way it goes. Come on." Ace didn't move. "We haven't got all day," said the man. "Even the committee can't hold them back forever." What Ace recognised as a group of the most dangerous prisoners were creating a human corridor, their backs to her, facing outwards towards the other prisoners in the cell. Ace walked along the corridor, the man from the committee beside her. "Listen, next time you're arrested, see if you can get them to put you back in this cell." "I'm not coming back." The man was looking past Ace at the cell door. "Maybe not," he said. Waiting beyond the barred door were a man and a woman. The woman looked just a few years older than Ace. The man's age was harder to guess. He had beautiful Eurasian features, but he was stooped and old-looking, beaten-looking. Ace found herself thinking that he wouldn't last long in the cells. The woman leaned forward and passed something through the bars. It looked like a telephone. The man from the committee accepted the telephone and took an American Express card out of his shirt pocket. Ace saw that the portable phone had a small screen on the handset. The man ran his credit card down a groove in the side of the phone, and the screen lit up, showing numbers and a $sign. "That's equitable," said the man. There was the chunking sound Ace had heard once before, and the cell door shivered. The man stood aside politely to let Ace by. Ace stared at the open door and the man and woman who stood waiting on the other side. The man from the committee winked at Ace. "I haven't figured out a way of charging them for incoming prisoners yet, but I'm working on it." He smiled as Ace walked past him and out of the cell. The man and woman were immediately beside Ace, a little closer than she would have liked. Ace's heart was racing. The cell door was locking behind her. She was out. Ace couldn't quite believe it. She felt like running before someone could change their mind. Now that she had time to think, the pain was coming back. Her shoulder pulsed with pain and sweat crawled down her sides. She felt a little feverish. The woman was smiling at her. She had perfect teeth. She caught Ace's hand and shook it. "My name is Stephanie. This is Mr. Mulray." "Are you sure?" Peterson was saying. "The subconscious mind can respond with amazing speed." "You're talking about reflexes," said Mancuso. "I know what my own reflexes feel like. It was a moment of extreme stress." Mancuso set aside her cup of powdery machine-tasting coffee. "Listen, I didn't do anything. I was standing there in the drugstore. The situation appeared to be under control. I was trying to do a count in my head, working out if we dropped all of them. Then the gun swiveled. It just moved on some kind of universal joint just over the handle. It moved by itself." Peterson sighed and took a Phillips screwdriver out of a coffee mug full of pens on his desk. On the coffee mug there was a big letter I, then a drawing of a heart, then big letters NY. The heart had bullet holes in it. They never tell us exactly what to expect with the new weapon systems. He opened a concealed panel on the underside of the gun and began to work at a recessed screw. "I thought you guys designed them," said Mancuso, pacing the laboratory area. The R&D lab was a big open space occupied by workstations, desks, and long benches. It was silent except for recurrent deep rumbling and a regular high-pitched beeping sound. "Mostly we do," said Peterson, "but sometimes we get government or company specifications, features they want us to test." "Features they want us to test," said Mancuso, returning to stand at the desk beside Peterson. "When was the last time one of you guys fired a gun? When was the last time you dismantled one? These things have been known to blow up when you take them apart. Greetings from the Pacific Basin." Peterson's fingers had found the seam that divided the lower cylinder of the gun, and he was prying it apart. "Where's that noise coming from? The beeping?" Mancuso crushed her coffee cup and dumped it in a bin of junk fax and printout. "Why don't you settle down? Read a book or something." Peterson indicated his desk screen. "That noise is the coder on the doorway lock, the side entrance down in the alley. Ignore it. It's just some wino punching numbers, trying to get lucky." On the small screen, digits flashed on in time with the beeping sound. Peterson watched the sequence of numbers for a moment, then returned to the gun on his desk. "Come and see this." The black metal cylinder was lined with a white plastic honeycombed matrix that supported the gun's control system. There were surprisingly few components. A complex optical unit with a shatterproof quartz lens that peeked out of the front end of the tube just under the unit. A complex optical unit with a shatterproof quartz lens that peeked out of the front end of the tube just under the muzzle. A bus cable that ran the length of the cylinder. A little silver sticker that said "Made in Korea." Some drops of spilled solder. A rack of chips and a large non-standard chip with a luminous line framing it. Peterson pointed with the screwdriver. "That's special. It's powered all the time. It has its own long-life battery on the underside." Peterson's fingers moved to the bus cable, gently working it free. A flat tongue of clear plastic emerged with a network of copper lines embossed on it. Peterson had connected an earthing line to his wrist so that the static wouldn't fry the circuitry. "So what's it for?" said Mancuso, leaning closer. "The other chips are just onboard memory in the operating system. That big one's the intelligence. They don't call it a smart gun for nothing." Mancuso pointed at the display above the magazine sleeve on the gun. The magazine itself lay on Peterson's desk, grey and copper bullets visible in the glow of the desk lamp. M-T. What the hell does M-T mean? It means no ammunition. The gun is empty. It also means the bastards were too cheap to give you anything more than a 3-character display. You can also use that readout to do a general systems check when you dismantle the weapon. It'll probably also show the time and date and store phone numbers for you. Mancuso picked the magazine up and thumbed bullets out of it onto the desk, the spring easing a new round up each time. She remembered bright colours flowing out of plastic bottles, gathering at her feet. I was holding it, talking to Breen. This witchy girl came out of nowhere. From behind some shelves, she had us. We were finished. She had her gun right on me. Then this thing moved, aimed, and fired itself. That's pretty smart. Peterson was carefully working the intelligence chip out of its socket. The thin, glowing light around its edges remained on as it left the motherboard. Maybe you can examine that. Tell me something about it. Peterson set the chip on his desk and adjusted the lamp over it. Maybe, he said. I wouldn't mind some answers before I go off duty. I might be able to get some sleep if I know what I'm carrying on the street tomorrow. But Peterson didn't reply. He was no longer looking at the chip. His eyes were on the desk screen, watching the numbers from the door coder flashing. He stared at the numbers for a moment, then began pulling magazines out of the piles of paper that buried his in-tray. What is it? Peterson ignored her. He had a magazine open and was looking at the screen again. The magazine was printed on cheap yellow paper with occasional high-quality ivory-toned pages for colour illustrations. It was a scientific journal of some kind. Jesus, said Peterson. He was running his finger along a row of figures printed in the journal, looking up at the screen and back down at the magazine. What's going on? Said Mancuso. What is that? It's an article in the maths section. Not really my field. It's about the ozone holes and modelling their behaviour. The big problem is predicting the movement in the atmosphere. I know. I had a cousin in Oregon. Well, they've got these equations. Peterson was looking at the screen again. Basically, all you have to do is understand that it's an unsolvable problem, he said, reaching for the release button for the door lock, and that someone standing down there in the alley is solving it. The steel bars securing the street door made a dull thudding noise as they drew back into the wall. He was smaller than Mancuso remembered. In the drugstore she'd thought of him as a little guy, but somehow, in her memory, he had grown. Now she was startled to see how small he was. She looked into his disquieting eyes, then down at his small, delicate hands. They were empty. Mancuso held her own hands out of sight behind Peterson's desk. There's no need for that, said the man, looking at her. Mancuso lifted her hands and brought her Colt sidearm into view. She didn't point it at the man, but she didn't point it away from him either. Peterson ignored both of them, concentrating on his desk screen. He was ransacking the buffer, retrieving as much as he could of the sequence of numbers the man had keyed in on the door coder. It's chaotic, but patterned, said the man. Peterson glanced up and smiled, then bent back to his work. He was happy. He was going to get a paper out of this. Did you find the hovercraft? Said the man. I thought you ought to know about it. That was a really stupid move, said Mancuso. Not only was it illegally parked, but I also suspected it of being involved in the commission of a felony, said the man. I can't remember if I gave you your rights, said Mancuso. I've still got the card, right here. The man's hand moved, and Mancuso's handgun automatically swayed up, aiming dead centre at the man's chest. But he just smiled as he reached in the pocket and took out the card. There's a misspelling in the Gujarati, he said. Stephanie was very tall and very blonde. Mulray was slim and muscular, with oriental eyes. His skin was golden, and he had thick black hair cropped short. Very pretty, but very tired. When he looked at Ace, he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. What's the matter? Your posture's all wrong, Stephanie was saying. You look like you're hurt. What happened in there? I had to fight. Ace's voice was hoarse. She cleared her throat. The first couple of times I was okay, but then one of them got me down and held me while another one kicked. Oh my God! The woman was looking at her with concern in her eyes and touching her. A light professional touch, a physician's touch. Jesus, those animals. Stephanie and Mulray steered Ace a short distance down the hallway from the cell and seated her on the first bench, sitting close on either side of her. Stephanie bent over her, fussing. A woman walked past, pushing a trolley. She slowed down to take in the three of them sitting on the bench. "Careful, girl," she said. "They just want your body." "Shut up!" snapped Stephanie. Breen was beginning to wish he'd flipped a coin with Mancuso. A visit to R&D about a weapons malfunction wasn't much fun, but registering a prisoner involved dealing with Cooper on the data console. It had taken 3 hours just for Breen to finish doing the documentation on the English girl. Now he had to get over to the lab and pick up Mancuso. Then maybe they could see if there was anything useful they could do in what was left of the shift. He was hurrying past the data section on his way to the car when he ran into them. Sitting on a bench near the cells, 3 of them, 2 clowns from the Butler Institute and the English girl. Breen dismissed the man as no threat. He looked like one of the walking wounded. The BI woman was different. Hard. She just looked right through Breen, as if he wasn't important enough to register. The English girl smiled, recognizing him. "Hello," she said. "All right?" "No, not really," said Breen, unclipping his holster and resting his hand on his pistol. "Good evening, officer," said the female BI, acknowledging Breen now that she had no choice. "Good evening," said Breen. He looked at the woman. "What are you doing with my prisoner?" "This young lady has been released into our care." "That's interesting. To the best of my knowledge, this young lady hasn't even been charged yet," said Breen. Through the glass he could see Cooper easing his fat bulk out from behind the data console and coming towards them, sensing trouble. "Come on now, time to go," said the female BI, taking the girl by the arm and moving away from Breen. The girl pulled free. "No thanks," she said. "This young lady has plans of her own." Cooper was hurrying towards them. "This is ridiculous. We have custody of the girl and we're going," said the woman. "I understand you people have very good healthcare schemes. They say you can replace just about anything these days," Breen said. Cooper was beside them now. "Hold on, Breen." "I am holding on," said Breen. "They're not taking her. It's bad enough letting these ghouls into the parks, but now they're taking prisoners out of the cells. She hasn't even been charged yet." "There are no charges," said the woman. "She's no longer under arrest." Breen looked at Cooper. He nodded, his double chin wobbling. "She's off the charge list," said Cooper. "She's free." "That's great," said Breen. "How long has this scam been going on?" The woman smiled and signalled to the man. They grabbed the English girl, each taking an arm. The English girl tried to pull away, but they hung on tight, clutching the black cloth of her jacket. Breen reached in and helped her pull free. The Butler Institute couple looked at him. "If she's free, then she's free to go without you," said Breen. The female BI moved forward as if she was going to go for Breen. He just smiled at her, hoping she was stupid enough. But the man touched the woman's arm, and she stared at Breen for a moment, then relaxed. She reached into the jacket of her silk suit and took out a small blue card that resembled a credit card. Printed on it was the B&I logo of the Butler Institute. "If you need a place to stay while you're in town, just put this in any public phone. It'll dial our number for you." She slipped the card into the English girl's pocket and left, the man following her. Breen and the English girl stood looking at Cooper. Cooper shifted uncomfortably and shrugged. "They must have read her medical records as soon as we logged her. The Butler Institute is in very tight with the service and—" Breen just kept looking at him until he stopped talking. "I don't know how much they're paying you," said Breen. "I hope it's worth it." The English girl stifled a yawn, standing beside him. When Breen turned to leave, she followed him. "Well, what am I supposed to do with you?" "Where are you off to now?" said the girl. I'm supposed to find my partner, said Breen. So am I. I don't believe it, said Mancuso. The doctor said nothing. Mancuso turned and looked at Peterson. He could be lying, couldn't he? He could have rigged this up. Peterson didn't reply either. He was examining the dismantled control sections of Mancuso's gun spread out on his desk. A thin, coiling cable connected the gun to the scientist's computer. Peterson looked at the display above the gun's ammunition clip, then back at his computer. Mancuso came and stood behind him, looking over his shoulder at the gun's small ammunition counter display. I refuse to believe it, she said. You've been talking to the doctor, I can tell. Mancuso's head jerked up, startled by the voice. The English girl from the drugstore on Fifth Avenue had come into the lab. She was standing just inside the doorway. Hello, Ace, said the doctor. Who let you in? Said Mancuso. Bloke called Breen. Claims to be your partner. The girl came over and sat beside the doctor. He said to tell you he's going home to bed. He'll see you tomorrow. Mancuso automatically checked her watch. Your shift isn't over yet, is it? Said the doctor. McIlveen would never have done that. Who's McIlveen? Said Ace, covering a yawn with the back of her hand. He used to be Mancuso's partner, said the doctor, going to the computer on Peterson's desk, until he was shot from a rooftop. I'm sorry, said Ace. She watched while the doctor typed at the computer keyboard. Is he dead? In a manner of speaking, said the doctor. On the screen of the computer, the words he was typing appeared, letter by letter. Who are you? The doctor pressed the return key on the keyboard, and the message was transmitted, travelling through the thin communications cable that connected the computer to the gun. The words were converted to ASCII codes, which flashed into the gun's control system, entering the large chip with the luminous line around it. There was a brief pause, and then symbols flashed up on the gun's ammunition counter. The tiny LCD screen was only 3 symbols wide, being designed to indicate how many bullets were left in the clip. But now, instead of numbers, it began to display letters of the alphabet. MCI. LVE. EN. Does that mean what I think it means? Said Ace. McIlveen. James Haynes, said the doctor. The lab was silent. After a moment, the letters on the ammunition counter faded away. Mancuso watched the tiny screen go blank, then she looked over at Peterson. He just shrugged. Mancuso moved to the chair where the doctor was sitting. Here, out of the way! The doctor got out of the chair, and Mancuso sat in front of the computer, typing on the screen. Why should I believe you? After a moment, a response began to appear on the gun's display. ISA, VED, YOU, RAS, S. Mancuso began to smile. She remembered the woman in the tie-dyes and flak vest and the way the gun had moved on its own, aiming and firing for her. I guess you did save it. Now a new message was coming up on the gun display. HEL, PME. Okay, don't worry, Jimmy, said Mancuso. I'll do whatever it takes. She began typing at the computer. What do you want? GET, EVE, N. Okay, Mancuso turned to the doctor. Let's assume for a moment that I buy this. In that case, the people who did this to Jimmy are the same ones who shot him, right? Right. And you know where to find them? In a place called the King Building, said the doctor. Mancuso picked up the outer casing of the gun, careful not to disturb the large control clip. She examined the B and I logo engraved on the metal. You're talking about the Butler Institute. The BI has been doing some very interesting work, said Peterson. Neural networks, artificial intelligence. Yeah, said Mancuso quietly, but I didn't know they were big on black magic. The doctor took the gun casing away from Mancuso and set it gently back on the desk. Our minds are processes that run in our brains. A mind is an electrical and chemical pattern, and patterns can be transferred and copied. The Butler Institute, said Ace. I think I'm beginning to get this. Breen said that they use people for organ transplants, keeping rich people alive with poor people's bodies. They've been doing that for years. Mancuso got up from the computer. She walked across the lab, moving restlessly. She looked angry. Where have you been? So if someone is found dead at the scene of a crime, like the drugstore on Fifth Avenue, the body goes to the Butler Institute, said Mancuso. And that's where they took Justine. Ace was looking at the doctor accusingly. She was thinking about a black and yellow capsule and an old silver locket. She was thinking about a girl with beads in her hair falling to the floor, spilling plastic mouthwash bottles. I saw your face when she did it. You really did look angry. You said it wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't, said the doctor. She took that pill far too soon. Mancuso was back on the computer now, concentrating. She quit out of the communications software and called up a database of the city's street plans. In 30 seconds, the blueprints of the King building were up on the screen. We have to get somebody inside there. You haven't been listening, said Ace. I think we already have.